condescending speech absolutely disgusting and disgraceful. This Liberal has no respect, not even for himself. Melissa Lantsman pours her heart and soul into fighting for Canadians, and this is what she gets. Here's the clip.
Thornhill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I may, I just want to a quick shout out. I often don't spend holidays away from my family, but I'd like to thank the Ottawa Jewish community for the warm welcome and the meaningful prayer and introspective services that I took part in today. I'm back at work, though, so on to the legislation at hand. What happens, Mr. Speaker, when young people do everything in this country that they were asked to do? What happens when they do everything that they are told? What happens when a 35-year-old who did everything that they were supposed to do, they earned a degree, they got a job, they worked hard, and yet they live in mom and dad's basement or in a 400-square-foot apartment because the price of housing has doubled since this Prime Minister got into office. Young people have done everything that they were asked to do, and they end up trying to keep their head above water in a housing bubble that is the second largest in the world. And for families lucky enough to own a home, they were paying 32% of their income to maintain that home when the Prime Minister took office. Now that family has to pay 50% of their income to be able to keep it. Higher costs, higher interest rates, less money for exactly the same thing in this country. Canadians have done everything that they were asked to do. Mr. Speaker, this government told Canadians not to worry. This government told people that interest rates wouldn't rise for a long time. They gave Canadians the confidence to take out those loans. There wouldn't be anything to worry about. That's what they said. Mr. Speaker, we're seeing interest rates, the ones that the government told us would stay low, go up. We have the highest interest rates in the G7, rises of 3%. Mr. Speaker, it's worth repeating that Canadians did everything that they were asked to do, and the percentage of Canadians who own their home or who are about to own a home is at its lowest level in 30 years. No government has ever spent more on housing than this Liberal one. This government will tell us that. And yet, it's a failure on every metric. Mr. Speaker, measuring success by how much the Liberals spent and not by how many houses were built in Canada is where we are at. And yet, all of those dollars and all of those talking points, we have still seen the doubling of housing prices in this country since the Prime Minister took office. That's a fact. Mr. Speaker, knowing all of this and presenting the House with Bill C-31 as a solution seems that the government weighed a political benefit of a proposal rather than an economic one. In fact, they've entirely forgot about the economics of this one. Mr. Speaker, the bill is the latest problem child of the NDP Liberal marriage, and it shines at raising Canadians' taxes and prices they pay on everyday goods. It struggles. It actually fails at producing an actual outcome to get people into the housing market. It doesn't allow them to keep their home or the certainty at the end of the month to be able to keep the lights on in that home. A flashy headline and an expensive tab for taxpayers is what got us into this mess. And surely members in this House know it's the exact opposite of what we need to get out of the mess. Maybe they don't know. The problem is it's just not housing anymore. It is the cost of everything. It's the cost of gas. It's the cost of groceries. It's the cost of home heating. They've cobbled together a piece of legislation that will only drive up inflation and which we will see every single dollar evaporate with the rising costs of that gas, of those groceries, and of that home heating. It demonstrates the government's out-of-touch planning for working families, for small businesses, for seniors, and for young people who have become victim of their incompetence. And economists agree. I'm not sure what the conversation is in this House during this debate, but the Bank of Montreal senior economist was quoted recently saying that the proposal was, we all know that sending out money as an inflation support measure is inherently inflationary. Those are his words. Scotiabank was clear. Their experts said any belief that the government's proposal will ease inflationary pressures must have studied different economics textbooks. The House that no one can afford is on fire, and the minister who introduced this legislation is painting the basement where the 35-year-old lives. C-31 is a political attempt to stay in power and not help Canadians, and that's a shame. There is an obvious fact to which many members opposite may not seem may not see as obvious at all. It's about the other back of the napkin math that is in this piece of legislation cobbled together on that napkin. The entire 80-page Liberal platform from just last year, not one of those pages mentioned developing a dental care program like the one that the government is proposing today. So we have to ask what the reasoning for members opposite to have that they have for introducing this legislation at this very moment. Has there been some sort of epiphany amongst the Liberal caucus? Have they suddenly been convinced that this is the silver bullet for solving the affordability crisis that they now admit is here? After 7 years of Liberal government and 3 elections, now is the time for a proposal we've never heard about before? Or is this is there another factor at play, which frankly, I think there is, like perhaps the fact that the government now relies on votes from the NDP to ensure its very existence, who curiously made dental care a centerpiece of their election platform just a short year ago. If this is the case, then the Liberals truly believe, do they believe that this is necessary? Is it the right thing to do, or is it a piece of legislation where $5.3 billion is just to prolong the messy divorce that we all know is coming? We should ask how a government who has failed not only to provide the details of this legislation, but we should ask why do we trust a government to create a new program when it cannot deliver the programs that it already has? This government can't pay its own public service. It can't get clean drinking water onto reserves. It can't get Canadians a passport without giving them an urban camping experience they didn't ask for. It can't assure Canadians Canadian travelers to get an app to travel across a border. It can't assure Canadians that when they go to the airport, they're actually going to leave on an airplane. And we're supposed to believe that it's going to deliver efficient, functional, national dental care to millions of uninsured Canadians that we've never heard of before? For those following this debate, and for those who will vote on this, dental care programs for low-income children exist in all provinces and territories, save Manitoba and the Northwest Territories, in addition to the 70% of Canadians who are already insured, who have coverage. This program is a political one, and it's designed to fail by a government who has failed to deliver the very basic services for Canadians. Upfront direct payments of $650 per year to any family they deem eligible, no questions asked, no strings attached, nothing in the legislation. Then it's up to CRA to follow up after the fact and verify that the money was used correctly. I'd like to know how the government thinks that CRA, which takes years to fix a minor tax issue faced by my constituents, will have the capacity to verify the proper use of a grant by hundreds of thousands of Canadians, given there has been much to be desired for in their ability to do just that with programs in the last 2 years. It is the wrong approach. We've seen it before, and we know how it ends. Economists have been clear about the impact of direct payments on the cost of living. And I know that members opposite understand that there's a cost of living crisis. They've just recently admitted it. On the other side of this House, Canadians will remember that they told us that interest rates would stay low. They told us that the carbon tax wouldn't go up. They told us that the problem was deflation, not inflation. We have record inflation. We have a plan to triple the carbon tax. And we have the highest interest rates since the 1990s. Mr. Speaker, it's a time for inflationary and high inflation, inflationary taxes, deficits to end, and give Canadians control of their own lives and put more money in their pockets. Reducing taxes, capping government spending, removing red tape is the best way to end the inflation crisis that we've watched this government impose on Canadians through their high spend, high tax agenda. No, not bigger budgets, not higher taxes, not more government. Mr. Speaker, this entire bill is an excuse for policy in hopes of being remembered in the next election when that rolls around. And it's just one more drop of gasoline on the inflationary fire. Canadians deserve a government that will put people back into the plan. And the Liberals have proven that they are not that government. And Conservatives won't forget that. Members on this side of the House won't forget that. And neither will Canadians. Putting people at the centre of decisions starts with voting against this bill. And I hope that members understand the consequences of another broken promise, failed delivery, and worse, economic hardship for Canadians.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader Senate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, the member talks about the supply and confidence agreement between the NDP and the Liberals, though she just cracked the 30-year-old mystery or something. Yeah, I think it's pretty well known that the NDP, in order to come together with the Liberal Party to bring forward legislation on behalf of Canadians, just to form some stability, that was one of their requests in the process, and the government agreed to wanting to do that, to work with the NDP. Like, that's how parliamentary democracy works when you don't have a majority. I'm just curious if the member is aware of that, or if the concept of parties working in a minority situation is completely foreign to, or perhaps they're just upset that we didn't ask them to form that kind of alliance with us. Perhaps you can comment on that.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Well, I'm actually not going to comment on the condescending speech that I just got from the member opposite about how this place works. What I will comment on is that this plan, or a lack of a plan, or a lack of a dental plan, or a lack of any details at all, does one thing and one thing only. It drives the cost of everything up in this country, and Canadians are suffering. And it ought to be clear by now that they need to do something about it. They need to lower taxes, kill the carbon tax, kill the paycheck tax, and stop spending money that we don't have.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know, and all Canadians know, that the members across the way, they don't agree with the way that we want to put forward policy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're trying to create things that are long-lasting. We're trying to create something bigger than ourselves. So whether you're talking about healthcare, you're talking about dental care, you're talking about pharmacare, which we're going to keep working on. You're talking about long-term, affordable, truly affordable housing. You're talking about childcare, which after 28 years of working on it, the government finally did. All of these things, they are long-lasting. Tax credits don't do that. All of this idea of putting money back into people's pockets through tax credits actually dissolves things like what the government or what the Conservatives are trying to do right now, to dissolve the pension plans, to dissolve programs like EI. But those are things that workers need. That's what long-term planning is about. We're in a series of crises now because there hasn't been that long-term planning. I understand that that's a difference that we have. However, I would ask the member across the way, is she not here to ultimately create something that will benefit all people equally, which social programs do?
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question, and I realize that it's not her position to have Canadians spend more of their money, to have Canadians with more of their money in their own pockets to make the best decisions for themselves. But there is no dental plan here. So frankly, I wouldn't want the member on my negotiating team because she didn't negotiate a dental plan. There is nothing in the legislation that she is suggesting is in the legislation.